There are science fiction films that entertain, and then there are science fiction films that change everything. Forbidden Planet, released in 1956, belongs firmly in that second category. But here is the thing most people overlook when they celebrate this landmark production: the story behind the camera is only half the story. The other half lives in the faces you see on screen. The cast of Forbidden Planet was a collection of actors whose personal histories, career trajectories, and behind-the-scenes personalities were every bit as fascinating as the alien world they were sent to portray. Walter Pidgeon and Francis Leslie Nielsen. These names appear in the opening credits, but what most fans never knew is just how extraordinary the road was that brought each of them to that soundstage at MGM's Culver City lot. Beyond the top three, the supporting cast included Earl Holliman, Richard Anderson, Warren Stevens, and Jack Kelly, actors whose careers after Forbidden Planet would touch millions of lives in ways no one on that 1955 production could have predicted. These are 20 facts about the cast of Forbidden Planet that most fans have never known. Walter Davis Pidgeon was born on September 23, 1897, in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, making him one of the most decorated Canadian-born actors in Hollywood history. What most fans of Forbidden Planet do not know is that Pidgeon received 2 Academy Award nominations for Best Actor during his career, for Mrs. Miniver in 1942 and for Madame Curie in 1943, placing him in remarkable company. In fact, at the time of his death in 1984, Pidgeon, Raymond Massey, and Ryan Gosling were among the very few Canadians ever nominated for the Best Actor Oscar. For a man who spent most of his career being polished and gentlemanly on screen, those nominations represented a level of artistic recognition that connected directly to what he brought to Dr. Morbius and Forbidden Planet more than a decade later. Before Walter Pidgeon ever set foot on the stage of a dramatic film, he was building a reputation as a singer. He trained at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, performed in theater and stage musicals, and arrived in Hollywood in the early 1920s, where he made silent pictures including Mannequin in 1926 and The Girl from Rio in 1927. When Talking Pictures arrived, Pidgeon appeared in a string of musical films, but never quite received the top-tier recognition he deserved. MGM signed him in 1937, initially casting him in supporting parts and other man roles alongside major stars like Jean Harlow, Clark Gable, and Jeanette MacDonald. It was only when MGM loaned him to Fox that he finally received top billing, in John Ford's How Green Was My Valley in 1941. That film appeared in 2 consecutive Best Picture winners. Pidgeon was a man whose talents had been perpetually underestimated, and that quality of dignified, patient authority is precisely what he poured into Dr. Morbius on Altair 4. For all his on-screen gravitas, Walter Pidgeon had a well-known off-screen reputation as a genuinely funny man with a gift for inappropriate humor. According to his Forbidden Planet co-star in Francis, Pidgeon made a habit of entertaining the cast and crew of his various productions with what she described as an encyclopedic collection of bawdy limericks. On a set where actors spent long hours waiting around massive constructed interiors while camera crews adjusted lighting, Pidgeon's comedic gifts apparently made the experience considerably more enjoyable. It is one of those small human details that reshapes how you see a performance. The man playing the haunted, obsessive Dr. Morbius was, in the downtime between takes, making everyone on the soundstage laugh out loud. Not content merely to perform, Walter Pidgeon took a major leadership role in the Hollywood professional community. He served as president of the Screen Actors Guild from 1952 to 1963, a period of more than a decade during which the entertainment industry was navigating enormous changes, including the rise of television, the Red Scare's impact on Hollywood careers, and shifting studio contract systems. Forbidden Planet was produced in 1955 and released in 1956, right in the middle of Pidgeon's Guild presidency. That means the man playing the isolated genius Morbius was simultaneously one of the most politically and professionally active figures in the American entertainment industry. It is a dimension of his life that the quiet authority of his Forbidden Planet performance quietly reflects. And Francis was born on September 16, 1930, in Ossining, New York, and started performing at a remarkably early age. She was a child model at 5 years old, appeared in radio serials, and was performing on Broadway by age 11. She signed with MGM in 1947, making her film debut that same year. By the time Forbidden Planet entered production, Frances had appeared in notable films including Bad Day at Black Rock with Spencer Tracy and Blackboard Jungle with Glenn Ford. But when it came to landing the role of Altera Morbius, the young woman raised on an alien planet who had never met a man other than her father, Frances was candid about the decisive factors. She later remarked that it was her shapely legs and her MGM contract that got her the part. It is a refreshingly honest self-assessment from an actress who had far more to offer than physical appearance, but who understood exactly how the studio system worked. Speaking in later interviews about Forbidden Planet, and Frances made a comment that perfectly captures just how unpredictable cultural legacy can be. She said that none of the cast members were truly aware, while they were making it, of the fact that the film was going to become a long-lasting cult classic. She noted that it had probably grown much stronger in its reputation after release than it was at the actual time of production. This kind of retrospective clarity is both humbling and illuminating. The people on that set were doing their jobs with professional skill and commitment, but they were not standing around congratulating themselves on making history. History, as it turns out, had other plans. The cultural reach of Frances's performance as Altera Morbius extends further than most people realize. When Richard O'Brien wrote the Rocky Horror Show in 1973, the stage musical that became the 1975 film The Rocky Horror Picture Show, his opening number, science fiction double feature, included a direct lyrical reference to Frances strutting her role in Forbidden Planet. The song name-checked her alongside references to other genre landmarks, cementing Frances's status as a defining figure of 1950s science fiction cinema. For an actress who had been uncertain in the moment whether the film would amount to anything lasting, that kind of pop culture immortality was a remarkable posthumous gift from a piece of work she had completed nearly 2 decades earlier. And Frances's post-Forbidden Planet career took a turn that was quietly groundbreaking. In 1965 and 1966, she starred in Honey West, a television series on ABC in which she played the title character, a female private detective. Honey West holds the distinction of being the first weekly American television series to feature a female detective's name in the title. Frances won a Golden Globe nomination for the role and received an Emmy nomination as well. The character was athletic, intelligent, and physically capable in ways that were genuinely ahead of their time. She was trading karate kicks with adversaries at a moment when such portrayals of women on American television were essentially unheard of. The woman who had portrayed the sheltered, innocent Altera had evolved into a television icon of female independence. And Frances passed away on January 2, 2011, in Santa Barbara, California, from pancreatic cancer, at the age of 80. Today, most audiences know Leslie Nielsen as one of the great comedy actors of the late 20th century, the deadpan master of Police Squad and the Naked Gun films. What most people forget is that for the first 25 years of his screen career, Nielsen was a serious dramatic leading man, and Forbidden Planet was only the second film he ever appeared in. Born in Canada on February 11, 1926, Nielsen trained at Toronto's Lorne Greene Academy of Radio Arts before earning a scholarship to the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York City. His first film was The Vagabond King in 1956, and Forbidden Planet arrived immediately afterward the same year. For a man who would go on to accumulate over 250 acting credits across 6 decades, Commander John J. Adams was where the cinematic journey truly began. One of the quiet ironies of Forbidden Planet's production is the billing arrangement. Despite the fact that Leslie Nielsen's Commander Adams is, by any reasonable definition, the central protagonist of the story, the man through whose eyes the audience experiences the discovery of Altair 4, the growing menace of the ID monster, and the romance with Altera, Nielsen received only third billing in the film's credits. Walter Pidgeon was billed first, and Frances second, and Nielsen third. This made commercial sense given that Pidgeon and Frances were established MGM contract players with significant public profiles, while Nielsen was a newcomer whose name meant little to ticket-buying audiences. Nielsen later reflected on the film in a 1991 interview, calling it amazing that a movie 35 years old remained just as entertaining and intriguing as it had been on the day of its release. One of the most charming documented moments in the relationship between Forbidden Planet and the Star Trek television series involves Leslie Nielsen himself. When Star Trek premiered on NBC in September 1966, Nielsen was apparently moved enough by what he saw to pick up the telephone. Star Trek writer D.C. Fontana, who was working as a production secretary at the time, later recalled answering an early morning call at the production office when Gene Roddenberry was not yet in. The caller identified himself as Leslie Nielsen, calling specifically to compliment the show and to tell the production team how much he admired what they had achieved. The man who had played Commander Adams on a faster-than-light starship a decade earlier had recognized his creative descendants, and wanted them to know it. The transformation of Leslie Nielsen from serious dramatic actor to comic legend was not an accident of circumstances but a deliberate creative choice by the filmmakers behind Airplane. In 1980, directors Jim Abrahams and the Zucker brothers specifically sought out actors known for playing earnest, reliable authority figures, believing that the comedy would work best when performed by people audiences instinctively trusted as straight-faced and serious. Nielsen's years of dramatic work, including Forbidden Planet, were precisely what made the joke land. His deadpan delivery in the face of escalating absurdity became what film critic Roger Ebert called the performance of the Olivier of spoofs. That transformation would never have been possible without the foundation of gravity that Nielsen had built across 25 years, beginning on the bridge of the C-57D. Earl Holliman played the role of the cook aboard the C-57D, a relatively small part, providing moments of comic relief in an otherwise serious film. But in 1956, Holliman's talent was receiving recognition on a far larger stage. That same year, he won the Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor for his performance in The Rainmaker, alongside Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn. Holliman's personal story was as dramatic as anything he portrayed on screen. Born Henry Earl Holliman on September 11, 1928, in Delhi, Louisiana, his biological father died before he was born, and his mother gave him up for adoption within days of his birth. He lied about his age to enlist in the United States Navy during World War II, spent his free time at the Hollywood Canteen talking to movie stars, and eventually made his way to the Pasadena Playhouse to study acting. Earl Holliman passed away on November 25, 2024, at the age of 96. Earl Holliman's connection to landmark science fiction and fantasy television runs even deeper than his appearance in Forbidden Planet. He portrayed the lead character in the very first episode of Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, which premiered on October 2, 1959. The episode, titled Where's Everybody?, featured Holliman as a man who finds himself alone in a completely deserted town, unable to explain how he got there or where everyone has gone. It was a haunting, largely one-person performance that set the tone for everything the series would become. The same actor who had served coffee and comic relief on the C-57D had, just 3 years later, anchored one of the most influential opening hours in the history of American television drama. Richard Anderson played Chief Engineer Quinn aboard the C-57D, appearing as part of the ship's crew in Forbidden Planet's ensemble cast. What followed across the next 2 decades was a career marked by steady professional presence in some of television's most recognizable productions. Anderson appeared in Perry Mason, Bonanza, The Fugitive, and dozens of other series. But his most culturally significant post-Forbidden Planet work came when he was cast as Oscar Goldman, the government agency chief who assigned missions to both Steve Austin and Jamie Summers, in The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman simultaneously across the 1970s. Anderson was born in Long Branch, New Jersey, on August 8, 1926, the son-in-law of actress Norma Shearer and movie mogul Irving Thalberg through one of his marriages. He passed away on August 31, 2017, at the age of 91. Warren Stevens brought a quiet, professional gravity to the role of Lieutenant Doc Ostro, the ship's medical officer whose curiosity about the Krell mind-boosting machine ultimately costs him his life. Stevens was born on November 2, 1919, and by the mid-1950s had built an extensive television resume across dozens of series. His career pattern reflected the working reality of the Hollywood acting profession during that era, a performer who could anchor any scene he was given, move between genres with ease, and bring absolute believability to whatever role he was assigned. Stevens continued working in film and television for decades after Forbidden Planet, accumulating a career that stretched well into the 1980s and beyond. He passed away on March 27, 2012. Jack Kelly played Lieutenant Jerry Farman, the crew member whose romantic rivalry with Commander Adams over Altera provides some of the film's lighter dramatic tension. Born on September 16, 1927, Kelly was 28 years old during Forbidden Planet's production. Within a year of the film's release, he had landed the role that would define his public identity for most of his life, Bart Maverick, alongside James Garner's Brett Maverick, in the ABC Western series Maverick, which debuted in 1957 and ran until 1962. Maverick became one of the most popular television westerns of its era, known for its wit and its willingness to parody the conventions of the genre. Kelly's Bart was sardonic, resourceful, and genuinely funny, qualities that were entirely invisible in the straight-arrow Lieutenant Farman he had played on Altair 4 just 1 year before. Jack Kelly passed away on November 7, 1992. The complete cast of Forbidden Planet includes one name that most fans have never encountered, Frankie Darro, who is credited in the film's documentation as Robbie the Robot, interior, uncredited. Darro was the small-statured stuntman and actor who physically operated the robot suit from inside during filming. Marvin Miller provided Robbie's distinctive voice, and Robert Kinoshita designed the mechanical exterior, but the movement, the timing, the physical presence of the character, the way Robbie turned, gestured, and inhabited scenes, came from Frankie Darro's body working within that elaborate constructed shell. Darro had a long career as a performer dating back to the silent film era, and his physical gifts were perfectly matched to the unusual challenge of animating a creation that weighed far more than he did while delivering the gestures that made Robbie feel genuinely alive. Listen carefully to the opening narration of Forbidden Planet, the measured, authoritative voice that establishes the film's fictional future history, describing humanity's journey from Earth to the Moon, from the Moon to the planets, and finally to the stars beyond the solar system. That voice belongs to Les Tremayne, one of the most recognized voices in American radio and television of the 1940s and 1950s. Tremayne appeared in a number of science fiction productions during this period, but his contribution to Forbidden Planet came entirely through his voice, and he received no on-screen credit for it. His narration sets the entire tone of the film in its first minutes, grounding the story in a coherent science-fictional timeline before a single image of Altair 4 appears. It is one of the great uncredited performances in the history of the genre. Gene Roddenberry publicly downplayed the influence of Forbidden Planet on Star Trek for most of his career. But internal documents from the development period of the original Star Trek series tell a considerably more specific story about just how deeply the 1956 film had penetrated the thinking of the people who built that franchise. Roddenberry's own correspondence from 1964 advised a production colleague to take a very hard look at the spaceship in Forbidden Planet, its configurations, controls, and instrumentation, when designing what would become the Enterprise. Beyond the ship, the casting process for the early Star Trek pilots circled back to the cast of Forbidden Planet with striking directness. Casting documents from that period show that Leslie Nielsen, and Francis, and Warren Stevens, all three central figures from Forbidden Planet, were actively considered for major roles in the new production. The creative lineage from Commander Adams's vessel to the USS Enterprise was not merely thematic or atmospheric. It was personal, documented, and deliberate. The actors who had populated Altair 4 had helped define the very template of what a starship crew should look and feel like, and when the next generation of science fiction storytelling was being cast, those same faces were the first ones that came to mind. The cast of Forbidden Planet was more than a collection of performers hired to read lines on a soundstage. Walter Pidgeon brought the weight of 2 Oscar nominations and a decade of Screen Actors Guild leadership to a role that demanded exactly that kind of monumental authority. And Francis brought intelligence, humor, and a physical presence that transcended